All right, guys, I'm going to get to the beginning here. So if it is the year 2020 and you are listening to this and you are done, this is it. This is the last bit of content that you are going to need for the test. If you are listening to this in future years, sorry, you got another unit. But this is all you really need for the test if you are listening to this year, which is the year 2020. What we're going to be talking about today is public policy and economic growth. So how does the government support economic growth? And we're going to talk a little bit here about supply side economics, right? So what we can do on the supply side. Now, this is a fairly controversial topic, and there's going to be there's a lot of theories involved here. Now, there are probably going to be some things that are said that some of you might disagree with. And of course, there are going to be others that definitely agree with these policies too. Important to understand the controversies as you will be getting older. You want to be able to have some ammunition in your pocket when you get into some debates. So, So we talked about production function. So if we're looking at physical capital per worker, and we're looking at real GDP per worker, what that means is this: the worker is what we call a variable input. Okay, it can change. So I can add more workers or hire less workers. The thing is, what we find is that if we add more workers to fixed capital, we get the law of diminishing marginal returns, which essentially means that just because I add another worker, I might produce more, but eventually I'll add too many workers and I'll produce less marginally. And that's what you're seeing in the curve right there, right? So the curve is showing us here that you produce more, and then eventually you get kind of a flattening of the curve, all right? Which is a topical statement right now. So in order to keep increasing, all right, with the amount of physical capital that we have, you need to have some kind of investment in capital, all right? So if, let's say, the government decides to make improvements in education and human capital, this could potentially make you more productive. I'll give you my sushi example, right? If I own a sushi restaurant and I find that through trial and error, I'm the most productive when I have 6 sushi chefs, right? When I had 1 sushi chef, I can make a certain amount. But when I made 2, I eventually get to a point that if I added a 7th sushi chef, I actually would get diminishing or negative returns, I get increasing returns at 6. Okay, so ultimately I have 6. And those 6 can make a certain amount of sushi rolls in a day. Okay, but what happens is I want them to be more productive. So what I decide to do is I go out and I head to Japan and I find the best sushi chef around and I say, all right, you need to teach my sushi chefs how to make more sushi. And they do that. That's an investment in human capital, right? They become more productive, they make a better quality, and that would be an example of human capital. So they become more productive. I still only have 6 sushi chefs, but now I'm more productive. And this isn't talking about physical capital. I haven't changed my location or anything like that. I've just changed the knowledge that they would have, okay? So I become more productive. So the same amount of inputs produce even more output would be an example of that. So what government policies most likely result in long-run economic growth? Well, we talked about this education and training. This would increase your human capital. But then we have a couple things that will increase your physical capital. So like infrastructure, so spending on public works, roads, bridges, harbors, that kind of stuff. In the 1950s, we had the interstate highway system. That made things much easier to transport, which would increase our production possibilities. And that would be an increase in physical capital. And then production or investment incentive programs. This is our supply side. This is also an increase in physical capital. So the idea is this: let's not tax the producers as much so that they can spend more money on physical capital and be more productive. right? So supply-side fiscal policy is basically government policies designed to increase production by reducing business taxes and or regulations, right? So taxes are taxes that the government charges businesses for doing business. Okay, the more taxes that they have to pay, the less profit that they have, which means the less production. That's the theory. A regulation is a rule that a business has to follow. And a lot of times that rule also takes away from production as those regulations are put in. Sometimes they're costs, okay? Now, why is this controversial? This is a controversial statement, right? So understanding the theory is important because they're not necessarily going to care about your opinion on the AP test, all right? What they really are going to care about is, do you understand the theory? Okay, so in theory, regulations cause less production from businesses, and so do taxes. They cause less production for businesses, okay? So number one, providing tax breaks to businesses might disproportionately benefit the wealthy, right? So the idea is if we're taking tax breaks for large businesses, we think that they're going to take that money and do good things for it, but they might not need the money, right? We might need that money to be distributed. So some people might think, hey, we need more government programs, or we need to do this and that. That's one of the reasons it's controversial. And then it also assumes good intent, that corporations will spend the tax cuts on the stuff that they're supposed to spend their tax cuts on, and not go back to like shareholders and that kind of stuff. So that's why it becomes a little bit controversial. So the idea is that they'll take the money that they save and they'll invest it back in their company, or they will make more products and therefore increasing the production. All right. So supply side fiscal policy. So in the long run, if the government decreases corporate taxes, all right, in theory, what that's going to mean is the corporate taxes are then going to be used to buy physical capital, which is an increase in investment spending, which then would make you more production and lower your costs per units, which would then increase your long-run aggregate supply. So your PPC would shift because you're investing in that physical capital. All right. So what would happen in the long run if the increase in social services? So this would be increase in government spending, but not on things that have anything to do with production. So let's say they decide, we want more parks and libraries and different things like that. Well, those things aren't, you got to produce those things, but they're not necessarily going to they're not going to contribute to GDP in the long run. So what happens in the long run is that you get an increase of aggregate demand as you are increasing spending, but you're not becoming more productive, right? So yeah, you're spending money to make a park, okay? But that park isn't producing anything after that. So what would end up happening in the long run is that we would get that long run adjustment, or that aggregate supply would shift back to the left, okay, back to the long run. So now we have an increase in price level, but we go back to our full employment, or our natural rate of unemployment, or our full potential full production output. All right? So government spending doesn't necessarily result in economic growth, and only spending that increases productivity and technology would be an example of this. So an increase in which of the following is most likely to promote economic growth? All right. So the answer to this is investment tax credits. All right. And that's it, guys. That's it. We're done with content. Now you just need to study your butts off. Thanks. Sandsguard.